Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Ukraine and the United States are set to hold high-level talks in Miami today, according to a Kyiv envoy. President Zelensky warns Russia is preparing new massive strikes across Ukraine. The White House announces a US-led board of peace to oversee temporary governance in Gaza as deadly violence continues despite a fragile ceasefire. The board includes Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Tony Blair and Jared Kushner, with President Trump serving as chair. A Palestinian committee to oversee post-war governance in Gaza has officially started operations in Cairo. The move comes as international efforts continue to shape Gaza's future after the conflict. Residents say Iran's deadly crackdown has largely quelled protests as state media reports more arrests. President Trump claims Iran halts planned executions, though Tehran makes no official confirmation of this. Reza Pahlavi calls on the world to help oust Iran's Islamic Republic and target Revolutionary Guard leaders. Human rights groups say over 2,600 protesters are killed as Tehran labels the unrest foreign-backed riots. Syria's President Ahmed al-Shara formally recognizes Kurdish language rights and restores citizenship to all Kurdish Syrians. The decree follows deadly Aleppo clashes that killed 23 and displaced over 150,000. Ugandan opposition leader Bobi Wine is forcibly taken from his home by the military to an unknown location after a tense election. Authorities remain silent as the internet blackout continues and rights groups raise concerns. President Trump says he may impose tariffs on countries that oppose his plan to annex Greenland, a self-governing territory of Denmark. He does not name targets or legal authority as Denmark, Greenland and US lawmakers reject the proposal. Now those are the top headlines of the hour, and we start this hour in the United States, and the Justice Department is investigating Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey for allegedly obstructing federal immigration enforcement following protests triggered by the killing of Renee Good by an ICE agent. Both Walz and Frey have condemned the probe, calling it politically motivated. Meanwhile, protests continue in Minneapolis as local leaders accuse ICE of reckless tactics. President Trump has stated there's no immediate need to invoke the Insurrection Act despite earlier threats, however. In a separate development, a federal judge ordered US immigration agents deployed in Minneapolis to limit their conduct towards peaceful protesters. The ruling prohibits arrests and crowd control munitions unless there's reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. This comes after the Trump administration's deployment of nearly 3,000 ICE and Border Patrol officers in response to tensions from the fatal shooting of Renee Good. Joining us now is Satoru Nagao. He is a fellow at the Hudson Institute and he joins us live from Krakow in Poland. Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, this is an ongoing situation since last week. The world stood and watched as an ICE agent shot 3 times into the head of Renee Good, a US citizen, after she allegedly rammed an ICE agent, or attempted to ram an ICE agent with her car. That investigation is, of course, ongoing. But since then, protests have sparked up across the entire city. And now we're seeing more ICE agents deployed to Minneapolis. Of course, a local judge has blocked the Trump administration and immigration enforcement from using violence on these protesters unless absolutely there is reasonable suspicion of criminal activity here. How would How do you think ICE and the Trump administration is going about this troublesome situation? Of course, now unrest in Minneapolis once again, not quite seeing a repeat of 2020 after the death of George Floyd in the city. However, unrest is rising once again in Minneapolis. Dr. Nagao, what are your thoughts?
Of course, this is not just an incident or crime incident or a crime, which side of the crime itself is political. But this is a very political situation, which is Democrat, Republican, which side you are, is a matter of concern now. So George Floyd's case and this case is a little bit different. George Floyd's case is, of course, this is white versus black matter in the United States. But this case is not just this kind of the race-related issue. This is more political between Democrat versus Republican. So, of course, after the investigation, this is the right way or not will be decided legally. But at the same time, politically, this is not the end of the situation. This is a framing up situation between Republican versus Democrat in the many places in the United States. And as a symbol, this will be the very important political clash. So that's why currently the U.S. president is Republican side, so that's a Republican leader. So that's why they have more power to decide the situation. But at the same time, anyway, this situation will continue to become the real crash in the midterm election this year.
Dr. Nagao, traditionally the GOP champions states' rights. However, the Minnesota authorities have been pulled from this investigation and, of course, have objected to the deployment of ICE in their cities. What is your analysis on how the Trump administration is going about this? Of course, you have the constant friction now since the start of 2025 of Democrat-run states, cities, and the Trump administration. How can this continue?
If the law and order situation will be deteriorated, it is better for the President Trump to deploy the National Guard to crack down. So that's why the law and order situation do not easy to lead to the victory of the Democrat side. But so local government is led by Democrats, so that's why they allow the demonstrator to act more, demonstrate to this incident. But at the same time, a little bit careful manner is needed for the local government because it could be the Republicans' more strong intervention in the Democrat-led state. So ICE, or the National Guard, which is led by the Republican side, the central government side, and completely opposite is local government can control the police situation or the police itself or something like that. So how to make the balance to framing or promote their opinion is a matter of concern in the politically. So this is not just a law and order incident. This is quite political battle between the Democrat versus Republican, and careful manner to make their opinion more persuasive is a matter of concern indeed.
And Dr. Nagao, of course, the actions of ICE and the way that they conduct their operations is highly controversial. What more can you tell us about how ICE conducts its duties?
Because the fact itself is 2 or 3 in this case, because the ICE's action was wrong or proper. That is a matter of concern. And the Democrat side say wrong, but the Republican side say proper. So that's why the fact itself is controversial in this case. So that's why this is quite a political situation. But once the political situation has framing up, even if the fact will be revealed, still the crash will continue, could happen. So that's why we should not think this is just a legal or the fact-based issue. This is just Republican versus Democrat in the United States. And before the midterm election, it will frame up easily. So that is maybe United States is facing just now.
Yes, Dr. Satoru Nagao, thank you very much for taking the time in joining us. It's always a pleasure to speak to you on these issues. We now move on, and the US Federal Aviation Administration has issued a 60-day warning for airlines flying over parts of Mexico, Central America and South America due to potential military activities and GPS interference. The advisory covers airspace over Mexico, Ecuador, Colombia and the Eastern Pacific Ocean. This comes after US military actions in Venezuela and heightened tensions with regional leaders. Mexico clarified that the advisory only affects US operators and does not restrict its airspace. The FAA's warning follows previous disruptions in the Caribbean, including a JetBlue flight incident near Venezuela in December. We stay in the Americas for our next story, and Brazil's military leadership is urging rapid enhancement of its air defense systems and the creation of a domestic UAV fleet in response to rising regional tensions after a US military attack on Venezuela. President Lula da Silva met with armed forces commanders who highlighted strategic vulnerabilities and recommended upgrades to medium and long-range air defenses, modernization of helicopter units, and the acquisition of reconnaissance and attack drones. Brazil's Defense Minister José Múcio Monteiro noted that around 10,000 troops are deployed along the Amazon region border with Venezuela, but said their equipment must be reviewed to counter emerging threats. The meeting follows a US operation on January the 3rd that struck civilian and military targets in Venezuela and resulted in the capture and removal of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, actions condemned by Caracas as military aggression. Joining us now to discuss this situation is Major General Siddhartha G, a senior strategic and international affairs expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for taking the time in joining us. Now, of course, things seem to have calmed down relatively, but of course, those tensions are still there. We are, after all, only about 2 weeks following this operation. But this build-up that we're seeing in the Caribbean still remains. And now we are seeing Latin American countries remain being concerned about their security in the Western Hemisphere. Do you see this escalating, Major General G?
Good morning, Thomas. Thank you for inviting me for your show. It's always a pleasure and delight to be in your show, particularly when you are anchoring and moderating the discussion. Very futuristic question. You see, there is nothing constant in international relationship. All I would say in response to your question is that while the threat may not be imminent, but it may crop up anytime soon. In 21st century, with leadership like Donald Trump, he says something, does something. Like classic example is the previous attack which took place in the month of June in Iran. He said he will come back in 2 weeks' time, but before people could have a breather, they could realize the USA had hit the nuclear installations in Iran. So this is the level of unpredictability. So therefore, what I would say that the attack on Brazil, they may call it under law enforcement measure, but it has been a military attack. They have made a kinetic attack against Venezuela. Brazil and Venezuela, they have a common border. And what happened on 3rd of January 2026, could also very well happen against Brazil. They have a common border, the CIA modules are operating. America has made its intention very clear that they are going in for the oil fields and they will dominate everything in Venezuela. If they dominate everything in Venezuela willy-nilly, the influence is going to spread, and given the long-term perspective plan is Monroe Doctrine to be restored. If Monroe Doctrine is to be restored under the Donroe name, then they won't stop at Venezuela. So logic says that from Venezuela it could be any other country, and that any other country could be Colombia, could be Brazil. Since Brazil is having a common border, I suspect that they possibly could be targeting to influence and dominate Brazil as well in times ahead. So therefore, it is quite logical for Brazilian defense forces and the leadership to take a call in making their air defense system, going in for proactive and modern equipments like loiter ammunition, killer drones, etc., and also go in for a high-end variety of air defense countermeasures so that they are not surprised the way Venezuela was surprised. The essential thing which needs to be kept in mind for Brazil is, gone are the days that we used to talk about three domains: land, sea, and air. Now, the time has come, every nation has to prepare in terms of three more additional modern paradigms of the domains: cyber, space, and electromagnetic. So therefore, Brazil would do well if they cater for these kind of eventualities and go in to prepare their air defense into making it a formidable one, so that they are not surprised the way Venezuela was surprised on 3rd of January 2026. Back to you, Thomas.
Of course, this is a global trend. The United States has just announced a $1.5 trillion budget for 2027 after a $962 billion one this year. Of course, we know that NATO has increased its defense spending, apart from a couple of countries, to 5%. China's defense budget for 2025 was upped by 7%, and of course Russia and the likes are remain in conflict, and so their defense spending had a 38% jump. Where does this play into the current global order? Of course, with countries increasing their defense spending worldwide.
Very interesting question, Thomas. In past 9 years or so, the global expenditure on defense products has gone up by more than 9%, if I respect my memory. Going by the CIPRI latest statistics, the figures are very, very alarming. They're touching almost close to 2.4 trillion US dollar. That is the kind of expenditure it has already reached. And the major countries, namely the USA, China, India, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Europe, all the countries are going in for an upward trend of military expenditure. As regards European Union, maybe if I may correct you, 5% is the target they have, Donald Trump has set for the European countries to be achieved by 2035. They are doing it in a very graduated, incremental manner. Presently, some of the countries have already hiked up their defense expenditure to 2%, close to 2%, and they will be raising it further to reach a target of 5% by 2035. This is what I have understood, but if I am wrong, I am prepared to correct myself. But be that as it may, the fundamental issue which is driving the global dynamics today is the militarization across the board without any exception. There is no country in the world where the military expenditure is not rising. Why is it going up? It is going up by virtue of couple of geopolitical factors. It is not a triggering of a war or a conflict. It is the fundamental issue is lack of trust in agreements, in common challenges, in formulating counter strategies to common challenges, not being unified, transatlantic relationship falling apart because America doesn't trust Europe, Europe doesn't trust America. So all these things today, the big question is that because of lack of trust, is or are the existing apex organizations able to deliver their mandate, common mandate or one single mandate of United Nations is to prevent occurrence of any war. Has the United Nations ever till date been successfully and effectively able to prevent any kind of conflict? That is what the moot question is. If it is not, then what is it falling or lacking in? Is it the veto power which is giving the superseding the other powers in the organization, and they are ignoring the veto powers of other members of P5 and going in for arbitrary decisions? Or is it the fact of Thucydide concept that the strong will do what it can and the weak will continue to suffer what it must? Might is right. Is that the say in the order 21st century? If that be so, then we need to address the core issue, because militarization is taking different new forms today in 21st century. It is taking the form of the pandemic. It is taking the form of biological, chemical warfare. It is taking the form of space conflicts which are taking place, that the new layer has been added to the new dimension of the warfare. It is also taking the form of very, very innovative and creative means of deterring enemy, and by striking, going in for anti-satellite kind of measures. And the hypersonic is such a threat that no country, even the superpower itself, does not have the wherewithal to prevent or to ensure interception and detection of these missiles coming and hitting their major vital assets. So therefore, I would say that rather than militarizing the complete the world order, will do good by resorting to the traditional set of diplomacy and dialogue.
Okay.
Although I would say it has given us any result past, but we need to go back to the basics. Basics are diplomacy and dialogue, which may give us at the end of the day reducing the militarization, reduction of expenses on the military components and the products, thereby minimizing the potential flashpoints and which may lead to the conflicts in the world.
Yes, Major General G, stay with us as we move on to our next story, but stay in the Latin American region, and Colombia has launched a $1.68 billion project to develop an anti-drone shield aimed at protecting the country from attacks by unmanned drones operated by illegal armed groups. The country has faced ongoing internal conflict for 6 decades, with over 450,000 lives lost. Defense Minister Pedro Sanchez described this move as one of the most innovative strategies for national security and defense. The government has allocated $271 million for the first phase of the project. Between 2024 and 2025, Colombia reported 264 attacks from explosive-laden drones, primarily in regions involved in cocoa leaf cultivation. According to reports, these attacks attributed to the National Liberation Army and FARC dissidents, resulting in 15 soldier deaths and 153 injuries. This new initiative aims to strengthen Colombia's defense capabilities. Additionally, in November, Colombia signed a $3.6 billion deal with Swedish company Saab for 17 Gripen fighter jets, further enhancing its military capacity. We next turn to the Middle East, and Syria's President Ahmed al-Shara has issued a historic decree granting Kurdish Syrians citizenship and recognizing Kurdish as an official language for the first time. The move comes after intense clashes in northern Aleppo, which resulted in numerous deaths and displaced thousands of people. The decree also addresses long-standing grievances, such as restoring citizenship to those affected by a 1962 census that stripped many Kurds of their nationality. Kurdish identity is now officially part of Syria's national fabric, with schools allowed to teach Kurdish and also Nowruz now designated as a national holiday. Turning to military developments, Syria's army has issued warnings ahead of planned strikes on the Kurdish-held area of Deir Hafer east of Aleppo. The Syrian military has stated that it will target Kurdish positions in the region, accusing them of using the area as a base for attacks on Aleppo. Reinforcements have been deployed near the area following last week's Kurdish withdrawal from the city. And in response to these escalating tensions, the Syrian Democratic Forces, otherwise known as the SDF, have announced plans to withdraw from the east of Aleppo and redeploy to areas east of the Euphrates River. This decision comes after calls from international mediators and friendly nations raise concerns. Joining us once again is Major General Sudhakar Ji. Of course, this situation in Syria does remain volatile, even given al-Shara's recognition today of the Kurdish language, and of course providing those Kurdish individuals that had their citizenship stripped in 1962 of full citizenship. What more can you tell us about the dynamic in Syria? Of course, sectarian violence is rife. There are many peoples, there are many different strands of religion, but of course when talking about the Kurds, they are a hugely important aspect of understanding the fabric of Syria. Just briefly, Major General G, as much as you can, could you explain to us a bit about why this is so significant?
Yeah. It's a landmark direction given by the leadership of Syria. I think it will go a long way in bringing peace and normalcy and stabilize the situation. Just for better understanding by our audience, let me take the mind back to 2010, when the Kurds, they declared autonomous self-governance in North Syria following the 2011 uprising. Mindful of the fact that it will do well to the audience to understand, around 2011, we had this Arab Spring also taking off in Tunisia. This is to be understood in the larger perspective. So the Kurdistan, or the Kurds, they declared this autonomous status of self-governance in 2010 in Syria. Now, a quick reflection, very quick points, I would say, is that we need to understand that they have been demanding autonomy and independence since the late 19th century. This is to be understood, and this has concretized and solidified nationalist movements emerging after World War I. Now, after World War I, there was an agreement in 1920, and as per that agreement, the Treaty of Sevres, they call it, which had assured them and promised to give autonomous state, but it never delivered. And that state used to be called, as at that point in time when the consultation was taking place, a Kurdish state. Now, following this particular treaty, there was another treaty called as Lusar. It is called Lusane in 1923 treaty, which divided the lands among Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And the Kurdish efforts focused on registering central government and intensifying in Iraq the 60s, 70s, and Turkey in 1980s. Now, the key revolts of self-rule, such as those led by Sheikh Ubaidullah, they marked the rise of Kurdish nationalist sentiment against Ottoman and Iranian rule. Post-World War I, that is 1920s, like I have already brought out, the Treaty of Sevres, 1920, proposed a Kurdish state, but it was replaced by 1923 Treaty of Lusane, leaving Kurds stateless. That is why the current thing is taking place. They have been demanding a separate state, but in absence of separate state coming into existence, I think the Syrian government has taken a good call and trying to include their language in the constitution, giving them the place of autonomy, as also giving them the fundamental rights and right to their self-determination, and also as an entity, giving them rightful place in the Syrian society and the country. Back to you, please.
Major General Sudhakar Ji, as always, it is a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for taking the time and joining us here on NewsX World. Now we conclude with some news from the United States, and the country has warned Canada that it will regret allowing China to import up to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles. US Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said Canada's decision could threaten American auto workers. The US imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs in 2024 and now fears China will gain a larger foothold in North America. US officials, including Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, say the limited number of vehicles won't disrupt American exports to Canada. Despite this, the US continues to protect its auto industry with tariffs. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney expects a reduction in Chinese tariffs on canola seed, and the US also raised concerns over Chinese vehicles' compliance with cybersecurity regulations. Meanwhile, lawmakers from both parties in the US have opposed Chinese cars, with Ohio Senator Bernie Moreno vowing no Chinese vehicles will be sold in the US. Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.